on the history of North American Indigenous people. To obtain our goal, we will be offering outdoor events such as weddings at an affordable price point. Come celebrate with us. So the reason I got here is one of my current jobs is I'm a native archaeology monitor, and we go around collecting Indigenous artifacts on current workplaces or sites that they're looking to develop. And I was sitting there one day going, what's the point in me collecting the artifacts if we don't have a depository or a museum to showcase these artifacts? So I literally put down the shovel and I went back to school to learn how to open up my own business so that I can open up a museum. So a museum is going to be very costly. So to get there, I'm going to offer weddings and other outdoor venues to other people at affordable price point to get to the museum part. So thank you for your time. I'm going to pass it to Omar.
Thanks.
Hi, Rachel. It's nice to meet you. Let me just start on camera. So my name is Omar Hashemi. I'm with my partner. I have a partner, Aaron Osborne. Doesn't look like he's here, but we run a company called Fast Track. And Fast Track is a built-in application on delivery drivers' phones that actually saves drivers up to 30% of their day while scanning their packages. And a little bit about me, I love dogs. I love playing Frisbee, and I've been super interested in entrepreneurship for a very long time. And I'm really happy that I've started the LEAD program because this is actually my first ever sort of entrepreneurial take on, like on a platform and actually like taking a class. So yeah, that's a little about me. It's a pleasure to meet you.
You too, thanks. And who would you like to throw it to?
I will throw it to Charlene.
Hi, Rachel. I'm Charlene from Real Model Mom, and it's an online platform that teaches girls and young men how to model and enter the entertainment business, basically. I started this because there's a lot of scams in the entertainment business, and throughout all of my experience, I've seen people get involved in them, and I really wanted to help people not to avoid those scams and how to not spend a ton of money and how to enter the entertainment business in a proper way and a safe way as opposed to an unsafe way. I also like dogs. I always have my little Yorkie beside me. And I like to do yoga every morning. Who didn't go yet? I don't know.
Chris, I think.
Andre or Chris? Chris?
I'll go yet. Oh, okay. So, hi, I'm Chris. So yeah, I'm the founder of Bernie's. Yeah, so we create unique dog products with unique styles and patterns, and we have a mission to like the difference I want to make with my company is that I want to donate a portion of the proceeds towards organizations that help animals. And I wanted to start the company because like I love animals for sure. I love dogs, and then also like I have a always love fashion, so I wanted to like mix the two and start the company. And I guess like something like an interest of mine would be like technology. I love the way that I could like shape the future, and I'm also into like learning new languages, and I think that's really cool. And I think we've met before, Rachel, at the Socialpreneur chat, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Awesome. And you're pretty consistent with your story, so that's good. You're like, I remembered our conversation, and it sounds like you're kind of refining as you go, which is awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Thanks. And Andre, you're welcome to speak up too if you'd like.
Sorry, I'm also getting some work done like Dave.
Yeah, no worries.
But yeah, sure, I'd love to go. Yeah, so I'm Andre Garzon. I'm an artist, illustrator, and writer based in London. I'm really excited about community. That really excites me, and so I love meeting people who are as interested in investing in the community as I am. I love to read. I love to draw, obviously. Like to go on bike rides. Summertime is my favorite time of the year. Yeah, I started my company because I love making artwork, and I don't know what else I would love to do for the rest of my life. So that's why I want to make it my business and make it my life's work, I guess. I'm really excited about meeting other artists as well and discussing the process of art making and why it's complicated, why it's beneficial to us as human beings, and the challenges that come along with it.
Awesome, thank you. So, yeah, Kelsey, I know you, but did you want to join in, or are you happy to stay in the background?
Sure, I'll do a quick one.
Yeah, awesome.
Hey guys, I'm Kelsey Curry. I run Fanshawe College's Entrepreneurship Center, Leap Junction. And at Leap, what's really great is I get to work with entrepreneurs. And my favorite thing about entrepreneurs is that when you get a group of entrepreneurs together, they rarely complain. And instead of talking about problems, they talk about solutions. And I like working in an environment where I can work with solutions-focused creative people. So I think entrepreneurship is the answer to a lot of the world's problems, and I'm honored to be a part of that.
Awesome. So thanks everyone. And I really appreciated hearing a little bit about all of you and a little bit about the work that you're doing and the intersections between those things. And I think that's, you know, a really important piece to consider as an entrepreneur, because you know, people don't buy from businesses, they buy from people. People don't work for businesses, they work for people, right? And so much of what we do in the world involves relationships and knowing each other and kind of having a sense of, you know, not just what someone's doing and maybe why they're doing it, but also why I should care about it. And so I got a little bit of that from all of you in terms of, you know, kind of what drives you. And I could go, oh yeah, I mean, I can really get behind that, or I can really appreciate that. Even if it's not necessarily something I had thought of before, or, you know, I'm not maybe an ideal customer, I can still think, you know, if I saw somebody else who needed this kind of thing, you know, this person is doing some really interesting work in that area, and it just helps the brain to make some connections. So I don't know about all of you, but I really struggle with retaining facts. Some people are better at it than others. I am not good at it. Like at all. I was horrible at history because it was like memorizing dates and things that happened and that sort of thing. And although it's somewhat problematic and still, you know, the lens of the history is very particular, I remember a lot more about, I grew up in the States, by the way, so I know a lot more about American history because of Hamilton, because I was able to like connect some, you know, some things that happened with some emotional pieces. Not all of it is 100% right on, and again, it's through a very particular lens that has its own problems, and I won't get into all of that because that could be a whole other segment. But I use that example just to illustrate how you know, when you start to get people to care, or when you embed information into stories, it gets in people's heads in a different kind of way. So yeah, I mean, that's one piece. So one of the things that I often like to talk about when I talk about storytelling is this idea of the hero's journey. And it's a common storytelling structure. I would say that it's a storytelling structure that tends to be really rooted in individualism. So it has a very particular cultural context too. But it's a story structure that many of us know, particularly in this part of the world. And so it's this, you know, idea of a person just kind of going about their day-to-day lives, and at some point having some sort of call to adventure. And what that looks different in different contexts, but that's essentially what it is. And the call could come, sometimes it comes from within, a lot of times it's some sort of external imposition. You know, it could be a deity, it could be somebody in a position of power, it could be a magical awakening. So depending on kind of the story we're talking about, it might look a little bit different. But anyway, that person goes off on an adventure. Maybe they gather a group of people with them, and they go through a few challenges. They eventually have like a major battle, or a major point of conflict, I guess I'll say. It's not always violent, but a major point of conflict. And there's some sort of fundamental change in that person, and they come back to reality forever changed. And sometimes that's in, it turns into leading by example. Sometimes they're held up as more kind of formally as a hero. So there's a lot of different ways that can manifest. So a few examples. My dog is named Falcor. So I often go to the Never-Ending Story as an example of the hero's journey, and there are a few different heroes that go on that journey throughout that particular story. I named him Falcor because he actually kind of looked like Falcor when we adopted him. He doesn't so much anymore because he's a lot fluffier. So now I tell him, for those of you who are familiar with that film, that we named him that because he rescued us from the swamp of sadness. So we had lost our dog a couple months before he came into our lives, and he's made our lives so much happier and more full. So that's one story I often go to. Star Wars over and over and over again has hero journeys. Pretty much every Disney film. Are there any other examples that are coming up for folks as you think about how this shows up?
The hero journey you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of television has the hero journey now. So we see a lot of, like, especially reality TV, as this transformation from, the shy, sad person to this like new, amazing version of themselves.
Yeah, awesome. That's a great example.
I think like every Disney movie and like Lord of the Ring, every movie follows this path of somebody trying to find their way and then losing their way and then finding their way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Maxwell, I think you unmuted.
I was just gonna say Shrek as
Yeah.
the heroes.
Yeah, perfect.
That's the first one that came to my mind.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, so those are all great examples. The more I think about this concept, because I tend to be quite cerebral, the more I think about this concept, the more I start to unpack it too. So often the hero's journey, I mentioned it's very individualistic. It also tends to be a fairly masculine story. So I think it's not the only way to think, but again, just recognizing that that often we think this way. And I think often, especially entrepreneurs' stories tend to be kind of positioned really in that hero's journey kind of construct. Just a side note, I ran a Kickstarter earlier this year that was actually about kind of unpacking the hero's journey. So I started you all with sort of a journaling reflection exercise. I put together like a journaling role-playing game, super nerdy, but to really unpack that, you've been on a lifetime journey of trying to achieve or trying to get to a place or whatever, and sometimes we lose touch with ourselves in that process. And I think something to be mindful of in your own entrepreneurial journeys as well, how to remain connected with you, your why, what drives you, those kinds of things, and not lose sight of that connection is really important. But this is not my sales pitch. This is your opportunity to play with stories. So I am going to move into this idea of, you as the hero. So you are the hero of your own organization for now. We're going to play with this in a different way a little bit later. But to kick things off, and you already you all have, I think, a pretty good sense of explaining why you chose to do what you're doing. I will invite you to partner up in a moment. So I think we have breakout rooms set up to send you folks into as partners. But just to tell you what you're going to do in there. So you'll take turns here. First person will go. You'll take however much time you need. Start with 30 seconds, see where you end up, to say a little bit about why you chose to do what you do. So what was the thing that called you to doing the work that you do? And then your partner will ask you a few questions about, to get a little deeper into that why. And so I call this like the 5 whys. But just for context, this is not about like being a toddler, in response to your partner, but why? But why do you do that? But why is that, like, it's an invitation to get a little curious. So your question might actually not be why. It might be, what about, if I were working with Kristen, for example, I would say, what about running really created a shift in you? What did you notice when that happened? And then, maybe why do you think it's important for other people to experience that? And, what benefits do you see for, like, I think getting a little bit deeper, but really with a bit of curiosity. And so every time you hear an answer from someone, to then ask, another question that sparks from that answer. So it's really a practice in listening to understand and questioning to understand. So if you're in the hot seat, also really hearing those questions and reflecting on what is, what you notice is really interesting to your partner that they want to know about, because that'll be really useful for you as you think about ways to kind of tighten up your story as well. So recap, if you're in the hot seat, you'll take the time you need to explain why you do what you do. Your partner will ask you some questions from a place of curiosity. You'll answer those questions, and you'll know that you get to a place that you kind of have a solid idea or a solid, kind of brief story, when your inclination is just to jump to, well, because the world would just be a better place, or, something along those lines. So the real meat of your story is often that step before you get to, well, because it's just better, or because the world will be better, or to save the world, or whatever the case may be. So the step before you get there, and then you'll switch. So, one person in the hot seat, we ask the questions, switch to the other person, ask the questions. And we'll give about 10 minutes for this conversation, and then that'll take us right to 1. And I will briefly run through some of the other stuff that I had prepared for y'all.
You want them in partners, right?
Yes, please.
All right. Is everyone ready to go to their rooms? Off you go to your room. Go to your room. Rachel, do you want me to bop you into any rooms, or do you want to stay here and hang out with me?
I'm happy to hang out with you.
Awesome. I left Dave and Andre out because I think they're both working on other things.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I find it's actually, when I partner people for something like this, I find it's a little like awkward to run into those spaces.
For sure. Just a quick sec. Dave, if you're there, can you stop the recording for the 10-minute? Thank you. Over to you, Rachel.
Hi, everybody. So I won't do a whole debrief with everyone, but just would invite you to, if you want to share anything about how that was for you, then that's awesome, and I'll open the floor in a sec. But I guess my prompting question would be, did anything shift for you in terms of, you know, the way you were telling your story? And is there anything that you'd want to maybe carry forward for later purposes? Yeah.
I can go. I know with Christine and myself, we're two open people that speak freely, so it was very rewarding to just throw stuff at each other. And to me, we were able to get a very lot accomplished in that small amount of time, where we were both have the same common goals and attitude towards the end game. So it was a good experience, and I don't think I'd change anything other than just it's good to know that there's other people on the similar path that help push you to meet that end goal. So it was a good experience. I liked it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tyler. It was a good conversation, although it's short.
For sure.
Good. And Swaraj, I know you had your hand up.
I had Kelly with me, so it was very nice learning more about her. I already know a lot about her business over the last couple of weeks, but like the way I shared my story and the way she shared her story was more like a connection, like a friend, more than like going into a stranger and telling them like what I do and whatnot. I would rather read of something when I talk to a stranger. Like it was much more of a personal, which was very nice.
Awesome. Anyone else want to share anything?
Are we sharing the stories that we were talking about?
No, I think just in the interest of time, if you want to share, if there was any difference in the way that you're thinking about your story, maybe.
I guess like
sharing
the
your
difference,
story, you can go
'cause
ahead.
I'm always thinking about like the business and like the cause and like all that, but I guess like my own personal story, I guess I was more thinking about like I don't want to work for someone else, and I feel like I have so many great ideas, and there's to get it done. And like when you're working for someone, it's like so many office politics, and you have to word it in the right way. Like with my own business, I just like if I want to do something, it's getting done. So I think that's really, I just want to be like my own boss and make my own decisions. So I think that I thought about that and why I want to start a business.
All right.
I got to hang out with Maxwell, and it was cool because it was more like on a personal level, and it's nice to kind of talk more comfortably about your business. I got to see like where his passions were and everything like that. So it was a neat experience. I liked it.
Awesome. And Kelly, it looked like you wanted to say something.
Oh yeah, I talked with Suraj, and we had a really good conversation, and it was more like he had mentioned, it was much more like kind of like a friend to friend kind of conversation, and I got to learn more about how like when you like it's okay to say some things that are add some personality to how you describe where your business came from. Like I liked kind of knowing why he started his business, and kind of like he explained some holes that he had seen in the industry that he wanted to kind of fill, but then he also like applied kind of like his own personal story with that, like how when he moved to Canada from India 4 years ago, and explaining how like students aren't international students, like no one really tells them what they can do with their taxes, and just kind of hearing like that personal aspect of his story was actually like really made me even more excited about his business than I was before, and gave me some insight that maybe I wouldn't have been able to have otherwise. So I was very happy for that. So yeah.
That's great. And yeah, I think it's interesting that you pointed out that that his experience and the market gap kind of go together in a certain kind of way. And in some of the equity and inclusion work that we do, we talk about this idea that sometimes what's necessary for some is good for all or for many, right? And so there's that particular gap for folks coming from outside of Canada. But I would also say that a lot of us who are from here probably could use some help navigating our systems a little bit too. And so that idea of there's, a very particular personal reason, and a very particular gap, but that gap is actually potentially something that's felt by a whole different audience than maybe was who we initially considered. And if it's okay, that's actually a really great segue to the next thing I want to talk about. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about, the hero's journey and you as the hero. One of the things that I talk about in from my work in sales is this idea, and marketing as well, is this idea of thinking of your customer as the hero. And so really considering who you're talking to as the hero in your story, or your shared story, I guess I'll say. So all of the work that we do is in relationship with other people. And I would say your customers are heroes, your employees, when you have them, are heroes in your story as well. So none of the work that we do exists in a vacuum. And as much as, I think to Chris's point, it's nice to be your own boss. You're also going to always be in relationship with other people. So your people who buy from you will tell you when things aren't working okay in one way, shape, or form. And people who you need to be on board to deliver what it is you're doing will do the same. And so when we know that, and we recognize that we're always in relationship with other people, it's helpful to then think about the intersections between our own stories and the stories of those folks who might be working with us. So being able to do some of that reflective work around your why and what's going on and what you're trying to accomplish is one piece of the puzzle. Being able to think about what that story might look like for the folks on the other side is a useful piece as well. So I won't kind of put you through the paces right now, but one of the things that can be really helpful is mapping out a persona of, I would say your number one customer, ideal customer. So thinking about their demographic realities, so gender, age, education, profession, marital status, if it's applicable to what you do. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Race, ethnicity, if that's applicable to what you do as well. Psychographics is the marketing language, but what that really means is the values, opinions, attitudes, and interests that folks are bringing to the table. So this is a little bit more about how they think and what might be important to them. Engagement preferences, so thinking about online and offline versus offline engagement. I mean, that's actually kind of outside of COVID, what are people's preferences in terms of how they engage with people. And even honestly, if you know that in our current context, as we're still figuring out how we're operating and we're transitioning, into more things being open, recognizing that we may dial that back at some point, and things may shift again. It's still really important to understand how folks like to engage, regardless of whether or not it's possible. So if people really do prefer, offline engagement, what is the real driver behind that? Is that about human connection? Is it because they struggle with virtual spaces? Is there a way that you can kind of facilitate the connection that folks are looking for in the absence of our ability to actually do in-person stuff? And geographic, so where are folks located and does that matter? So that'll show up differently for different businesses. One thing that I often like to do with folks, so you may be starting to think about, I will actually get you to do one thing quickly. So you may be starting to think about, a person you might have in mind who might be an ideal fit for the work that you do. I would invite you to write down in just one sentence, or maybe even some bullet points, why that person would buy what you're selling. Just take a minute to envision somebody and think about why they might buy what you're selling. Okay. Looks like some folks are still writing maybe, but yeah, and this is a useful exercise, really just thinking about why someone might buy what you're selling, what makes them buy, how might they feel better, what do you want them to feel when they engage with the work that you're doing, so that you can start to then think about what story you might need to tell to them so that they can see themselves in the journey of working with you or buying your product or whatever the case may be. So I'm going to pivot quickly into the social and impact side of this, which is really so building on that idea that all of our customers are heroes, all of our employees are heroes in our own story. The reality is, so we talk about social impact and what is a social impact business and all of that stuff. And I think there's a lot of gray area in terms of what fits as a social enterprise, for example, what isn't a social enterprise. And here's the reality: 100% of businesses are social. There is not a business that exists that does not have some sort of social interaction with the world around it and some sort of connection to the community that it exists within. And 100% of businesses have impact as well. There is no way to avoid it. The work that you do has an environmental impact. It has a human impact. Anytime we're taking people's time or money, there's an effect of that. And so the opportunity that we have is always to think about whether that impact is positive or not, and how much of it we want to be really aware of and mindful of. So there are a couple of frameworks that I'll introduce you to. So I understand that there was some conversation about B Corp and what that's all about. So I have quite a bit of experience in that area. And another framework that I'll just quickly introduce you to as well is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm not sure if that's familiar language for everybody, but in essence, it's a set of 17 goals that we're looking at globally, and I'll show you a picture of what that looks like. Yeah, so 17 goals around the world that support global development. And so usually that means in the global south or in the developing world or whatever language is useful for folks. But these are goals that we are looking at kind of around the world, and folks in the business community are also starting to take these on. And then there is an interconnectedness between the B Corp movement and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In that, B Lab, which is the nonprofit behind the B Corp movement, and the UN Global Compact, which is the group of like businesses that kind of come together around this global development work, so around the UN Sustainable Development Goals now. The Global Compact and B Lab have partnered on a product called the SDG Action Manager, which basically takes the tool that B Lab already uses to certify B corporations and maps the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, onto the questions in that tool. So these two things kind of work together. So I'm gonna quickly share my screen here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. I hope. So what we're looking at now is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And what's interesting about these goals, or what I find useful about these goals, is that they're pretty much plain language. So they're things that, first of all, a lot of us can get behind, and do use fairly plain language. If this is something that's interesting to you at all, you can go a whole lot deeper into, so each of the 17 goals has targets associated with it. So actual changes that are being measured, and then each of those targets also has indicators associated with it. So it goes down a couple layers deep, and there's like 127, something like that, different things that you could theoretically measure. What's interesting about measurement in my work is that it provides a bit of a framework for telling your story. So sometimes we talk about it as scaffolding in the like kind of storytelling context. So on the one hand, we started with, how do we get people to care about what we're doing? And then this other piece is a little bit more of like, how do we get people to make sense of the stories that we're telling and the work that we're doing? So scaffolding or a framework or whatever language feels good for you like this can be really useful. So for example, we actually were just doing a workshop in the team meeting that I had right before I joined you here, where we were going through all of our programs and identifying how they align to the Sustainable Development Goals. So one of the programs I work on, for example, is the Women of Ontario Social Enterprise Network. That is fairly obviously, I think, tied to gender equality. So that's one of the goals that we're doing a lot of work around. And so that just provides us a framework for telling some stories about the work that we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, the change we want to create. Another piece, because it's a business support kind of offering, is 8, decent work and economic growth. So if we support people in being able to build their businesses, they can ideally pay themselves and also create decent work for the people that they employ. So, and they're contributing to the local economy and all of those things. So that's an example of how, of one framework. And I could go on about that for hours, I won't. But in the local context, one way that the Sustainable Development Goals are being used for storytelling purposes is actually by the London Community Foundation, which I don't know if you're all familiar with the London Community Foundation, but they release a vital signs report, which basically kind of looks at the state of the community, what's needed, what's going on, that sort of thing. And they've done a tremendous amount of work mapping the areas of their priority areas onto the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's some other work going on around that locally as well. So I know this is kind of rapid fire, but it's again, just looking at that sort of global framework, how somebody's using it locally, and maybe it'll spark something for you in terms of, a way that you might use a framework to tell your story as well. And then there's the B Corp movement as well. So I know you learned a little bit about kind of what this is all about. But B Corp certification basically is, acknowledging those businesses. This actually needs to be updated because certified B Corps, I think they're over 3,000 now. And in Canada, we usually have about 10% of the global number. But yeah, so B Corps are businesses that meet high standards of social, environmental performance, public transparency, legal accountability, and balance their profit and purpose. It actually has just occurred to me. They've done a lot of work recently. So because there's a certification, but there's also a movement around the certification. So there's, you know, over 3,000 now certified B Corps. Again, they have this shared value system, this kind of shared language that they can use to kind of come together around issues in the world. And so, for example, around Black Lives Matter, many of the businesses involved in the B Corp movement have, you know, engaged in some storytelling around the work that they're doing, around how much work still needs to be done, and the responsibilities that businesses have to create equitable, inclusive economies in the places where they operate. And then within that movement, there are folks who are particularly political and really use that space and their platform to really create change. There are some folks who are less outspoken, but change the way that they do business. Like really look at their supply chain, for example, and ensure that that they're really mindful of the way that racism is showing up in their supply chain and making necessary changes as a result. So how it shows up within the community is a little different. So there's like that sort of collective community story that's being told, and then there are also folks within the community who are kind of holding on to the story and telling it in their own unique ways. I won't tell you why to certify. It's kind of, but I will give you a couple of examples of how the B Corps within the community use this scaffolding again as a way to tell their stories. So physically in their workspaces, Athleta has used the B Corp logo and has their mission on their board. King Arthur Flower as well has like a whole wall kind of dedicated to their B Corp certification and all of the things that make it up. So particularly focusing on their employee ownership and all of the work that they do. So I would say their primary focus is in equity and inclusion in their workforce. That's a really big piece of what they do. And they've taken the space to tell that story. In print, so Athleta, again, really kind of leading the charge. And here in Canada, Luna Pads was involved in a Vote Every Day campaign, and so really used that as an opportunity to tell their story, tell their B Corp story in each of the packages that they shipped out during the time that we ran that campaign. On social media. So, you know, again, really using that scaffolding to tell a story about the ways that B Corp certification shows up within each of these businesses. So Libro Credit Union here in London, Southwestern Ontario, and Shandos Construction is an employee-owned construction company out west, which is really cool. And then entrepreneurs themselves also have a lot of different spaces where they tell their stories. So really commonly, we see it in the context of podcasts. So if you're interested, by the way, the Boiling Point podcast is an excellent podcast, I think, for entrepreneurs that want to make the world a better place. The B Corp Effect is also a pretty good podcast. It's offered, well, it's the BDC produces it. So obviously they work with folks who have borrowed money from BDC. That's kind of how that works. But B Corps in particular are who they feature there. So yeah, a few examples. I know it was kind of rapid fire there, but of how you can kind of, how a business could translate that scaffolding into the way that they tell their story and share their stories. So a couple of examples of from the sort of social impact world. Those aren't the only kind of frameworks available to you, but they're the ones I know best. So yeah. Any questions or thoughts from folks?
You guys have any questions you'd like to ask Rachel? I know it's been a long day, but any questions? I know a couple of you got recommendations that you might want to consider B Corp certifications. You can ask about that or about your stories. Suraj?
It's more of a comment than a question. I really like when you said that people buy from people, the focus on relationship, not just the business. That was very good.
Great, thank you.
Chris, you look like you had a comment too.
Yeah, is it only social, like it can be any social enterprises that are B Corp? It's not just environmental?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
so yeah, B Corps usually, the way I think about it is there are two kind of major categories of who certifies as a B Corp. There are those businesses that, through the way they operate,
Yeah.
do things in a really responsible way. So, so for example, there's like a few different areas of the B impact assessment, like a few different categories within the impact assessment that you get like almost a roll-up score on. So there's like community, environment, workers, governance, customers. Can't believe I forgot that. But yeah, so those different sort of areas where you can get sort of a roll-up score. So a business that was really, we would refer to them as like, you know, certifying because of operational excellence. They would probably have a pretty high score on governance and workers, maybe also customers as well. And then there are some that certify really because of their, like the direct impact of their product. And so that might be environmental impact, it might be social impact. But there's usually a product or service that is specifically oriented around a particular social or environmental issue.
Oh, okay, well that's good to know. I think that would apply to me,
Yeah, so the most important thing is, it's a lot of questions. It is, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a significant amount of work, really rewarding and a really great way to understand your business too. Like I actually used it. I used the impact assessment as a decision-making tool as much as I did a measurement tool within our organization when we were kind of going through the process. You have to hit a minimum score of 80 points on the impact assessment. Okay. In order to certify, and once you're there, it doesn't matter which questions get you there. It just matters that you have the score, and that is largely because there's no such thing as universal anything, but it allows for you know, a more kind of universal look at responsible business.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
All good? Okay. Thank you so much, Rachel. It was so great to have you and learn a little bit more about our stories. And I think, I mean, I know you and I didn't participate in the activity, but it seemed like the activity where everybody got to really pair off and have each other dive into their businesses was really impactful. So I really appreciate you bringing that to us.
Awesome.
Teaching us a little bit more about B Corps and social responsibility. Rachel will be back as we talk more about social enterprise and diversity and inclusion and various other things, but no spoilers. We will see her in about 3 weeks. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
August 11th, I believe.
We'll see her in August, I think. No, August 6th.
August 6th, that's it,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So we're really excited that Rachel could join us today, and we'll be excited to see her again. Everyone, if we can give Rachel our classic waving send-off, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much, Rachel.
I thank you so much for having me and letting me like spew the things that I'm passionate about. You'll get professional pillar Rachel next time, and have a great day.
Thanks, Rachel. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Okay.
We'll post Rachel's contact information if you have any questions about social enterprise, about stories, or about B Corp. I met Rachel when she was knee-deep in the B Corp world, and she knows an amazing amount about this certification process and social responsibility. So reach out if you have any questions around that. Thank you for your time, Rachel. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Always great seeing you.
You too. Bye.
All right, everyone. Good day today?